Pope Francis has opened a historic summit on child sex abuse by priests, telling 190 leaders of the Roman Catholic Church that condemnations were not enough. People expected concrete and effective measures. Victims' groups have called for the Church to automatically expel priests and bishops who carry out or cover up abuse. Lisa Holland reports.
It's not unusual for the Pope to preside over bishops and cardinals from around the world at a Vatican synod. What makes this summit extraordinary, it's about tackling the shame of child abuse scandals which have engulfed the Catholic Church. As Pope Francis spoke of what he called this evil, those before him were preparing to attend tutorials to learn not about the teachings of God, but how better to protect children from abuse. The bishops were told the Church must acknowledge, not bury its crimes, however painful.
The wounds of the risen Christ carry the memory of innocent suffering, but they also carry the memory of our weakness and sinfulness.
Colm O'Gorman was abused as a child at the hands of a Catholic priest. Watching the summit from Dublin, he has little faith the Church will change.
The key point here is it's not a matter of the Church developing better systems of accountability within it. It's a matter of the Church, and the Vatican in particular, preparing to be held accountable for their own crimes and for their own cover-ups. And until that happens, we're not going to see any change.
When Pope Francis visited Ireland, crowds were well below the expected numbers. The abuse scandals have left the Church at a turning point.
The thing I've picked up on, and that I think is different from previous efforts by the Vatican on abuse, is that one of the themes of this summit is transparency. And I think that's encouraging. So we need transparency, and in that, abuse has got to come out into the open, the way it's discussed. They've got to listen to survivors of abuse.
As the bishops met, abuse survivors gathered at the Vatican too. Their message was clear. They won't settle for anything less than zero tolerance of crimes by the Catholic Church. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Well, I'm joined now by Brenden Thompson from Catholic Voices UK. Good evening to you, Brenden. Why is this happening now? Why has it taken so long to get to this point?
Well, it's the amalgamation of a process that really began in 2012. So there was a similar meeting, but just with representatives. So this is kind of the next stage. This is the leaders of all the bishops' conferences in the world, 114, 190 participants. And so this is big stakes. And for me personally as a Catholic, it does feel like it's taken too long. Actually, it does feel...
It's 3 decades since the abuse was
first
uncovered.
And there have been bits that have been going on, but my heart, I literally feel heartbroken and sometimes ashamed, personally, when I think about the kind of triple tragedy of the abuse, the denial, and the cover-up. But I think that this conference is starting on the right foot, where it's trying to change a mentality away from the Church has spent too much time preoccupied with its own sense of its reputation or its image rather than that of victims. So Pope Francis has started and asked all the participants to listen to the testimony of victims, to have their hearts broken so that they're in a place to start with integrity, to listen and then move forward with procedures.
And we saw the tears of one of the cardinals as he read out some of the victims' testimony. But what makes this anything more than what the victims fear, a talking shop or a PR exercise?
So, I mean, the main themes that they're trying to explore in these next few days are first, responsibility, what has to be done. So the very first talk that they've received today from Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines was to do with listening to the victims, how we need to... First, the victims have been listened to. That's essential, to have your heart broken. The second was by Archbishop Scicluna, who's like the Vatican's chief prosecutor. And he talked about how we can... It was very, very practical. So it was about how we take responsibility for handling cases of abuse and also preventing abuse. So it was, what does this look like locally? Working with civil authorities. What does this look like on an international level? So there was some real practical highlights about how we be personally responsible. The bishops, ultimately, I think Pope Francis is trying to tell them that this is a global problem and that actually there's nowhere you can hide. We need to be transparent, that there are consequences if you mess up.
And among the testimony that they heard, the victims wanting to remain anonymous, but the stories were incredibly painful. One, from the age of 15, I had sexual relations with a priest. This lasted for 13 years. I got pregnant 3 times, and he made me have an abortion 3 times, quite simply because he didn't want to use condoms or contraceptives. One woman saying, a Chilean man saying he reported abuse to religious authorities. He was treated as a liar and an enemy of the church. And there are thousands of stories. What needs to be done? The Pope Francis saying concrete actions, efficient measures, like what?
Pope Francis, I think, ultimately wants from this a conversion of heart. You can't hear, frankly, disgusting things like that without kind of being sick to your stomach. And it's that kind of sickness to the stomach that creates a conversion that wants to put policies in place. Where policies have been put in place, like in the UK, it's made a dramatic difference to the number of cases. So what Pope Francis is saying is that there are some parts of the world that don't believe. They think that this is a European problem. This isn't. This isn't just a Catholic problem. This is a global problem. And we need to make sure that the church is working as a leader to have the policy and the norms and the procedures put in place. But not only that, to kind of have the heart to follow these through, because it's not enough to just have the policies, the norms, because we know how to put those in place, but it's about having the heart for the victims. That's the mentality shift. This isn't a PR stunt for the church, or it shouldn't be, at least.
So what do those policies mean in practical terms?
They mean in practical terms how you liaise with the police when you report a case of sexual misconduct, how that works at the local level when it goes to the Vatican. So, for example, in the UK, we have a survivors abuse panel that gives advice to the panel that's to do with safeguarding within the UK. So in the UK is a good example. If you go to the nearest Catholic church to this studio, you will see the safeguarding officer for that church stuck up on the notice board as you walk in. You cannot work unless you get a DBS, a criminal records check. We live in a different church, thank God, now that protects victims, tries to create a safe environment for them. This needs to happen in places in the world where it isn't happening, and the church, to her great shame, has not been a leader in this regard and needs to be a leader. It knows how to do it. It has some success stories in the UK where it's had to learn from its own mistakes. We need to start doing this in other countries.
Victims haven't been listened to. Perpetrators have been protected. Victims want automatic dismissal.
Pope Francis released in 2016 a document, As a Loving Mother, which tried to put into effect procedures that would allow for the dismissal, not only due to criminal intent, but negligence on the parts of bishops if they don't live up to the responsibility of their office. So part of this is that, and he has stood down bishops in Chile, in America, in loads of other places. So this is beginning to happen, and there are changes happening. Is it happening perfectly? No, and we need to continue to allow ourselves to be challenged by the testimony of survivors and by media outlets that are keeping the church accountable, which it should be.
And so that also means greater transparency and disclosure.
Yeah. We need to make sure that there is a sense that there are no hiding places when it comes to this matter. The church has in the past dealt with this where it's quietly, if the accused wanted it, if the victim wanted it, that this could be dealt with out of the courts with an out-of-court settlement. I no longer think that's good enough. We need what the victims want, which is a sense of the truth coming out and justice being done. Absolutely.
Do you think the Catholic Church is capable of changing?
I am. I'm hopeful. Apart from the part of being heartbroken, I am hopeful. The conference themes, accountability, responsibility and transparency, they're good themes. They're listening to the voice of victims, which I think is essential. I am hopeful that the church, where it's a leader in other spaces, like when it comes to fighting human trafficking, because it's a multinational organisation, it can link civil authorities from countries where they're trafficked to where they are. Why isn't it a leader in this child abuse case? I don't know, but it can be and should be.
Brenden Thompson, thank you.